Hello, and welcome to my show. My name is Bret, and this is my channel, and this is where I talk weekly on Docker, Kubernetes, all container DevOps things. So if you've been here before, you know the drill. We're talking. I don't have an agenda today. Actually, that's not true. I do have an agenda, but we are primarily talking about your questions. So ask your questions, get them in early, and we'll go down the rabbit hole with you. And people in chat will answer your questions while I get to them eventually. If you ask too many, then I can't keep up. So it's some days it's fine. Some days we get a lot of questions, which is fine. So we're talking about primarily things that are in the DevOps space that are related to containers. I don't do anything anymore unless it's in containers. But that's just about everything nowadays. You can do functions as a service or serverless in containers now, which is fantastic. Finally, most of the platforms all support that. And so I spend a lot of my time in Docker files and in YAML files. So today, I'm actually working on a little project. I'm trying to update all of my open source in GitHub to use GitHub Actions for CI, and mostly for image building. So I used to use Docker Hub for that. And there are a few things that Docker Hub doesn't do when it comes to building images. So there's this neat feature in Hub that'll just auto-build your image every time you put something in GitHub. But it's really simplistic, and it doesn't allow some of the more advanced stuff that we can now do in GitHub Actions. One of the things I also miss is that you don't see image build status inside of GitHub because Docker Hub doesn't yet come back and tell your PRs and things. So I'm starting to move all the things to GitHub Actions, and I'm wanting to do that more across the board. So if we have time, if we don't have a ton of questions, and again, your questions are the priority here. That's why I'm doing it live. So if I get time, I'm going to work a little bit on that and talk about what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, talk about what GitHub Actions I'm using, what workflows I'm creating. And I also have a mono repo that builds a bunch of little utilities that I use. And I'm trying to break that mono repo up and use something in GitHub Actions called paths to actually make sure that I never update an image unless something inside that particular path of the mono repo changes. So one of the challenges when you're doing stuff in open source is if you start to break things up into 1,000 Git repositories, then you just have administrative burden of too many Git repositories. So I'm trying to do a balancing act of for my actual applications that do stuff. Okay, that gets its own repo. But for little utilities where I just need a Docker file, maybe a YAML file for that tool to work in Docker, don't make a repo for it. I put it in a tools mono repo thing. I also have short URLs to launch and run certain things. You can run Kubernetes manifest from short little URLs that I have. So if you have questions about how that works, I can go through that. So for example, you can actually do kubectl apply https bret.run/pod.yaml. I think you can actually run that, and it will run a pod in your Kubernetes cluster that comes from YAML in my GitHub that goes through a static website builder on Netlify. So I have stuff like that all set up for my courses, and I thought since I'm working on all that stuff lately as I'm updating courses, I would sort of go under the hood for you if you cared to show some of the relatively simple automation that I have built in there, because I'm just one person making a bunch of open source, and so how do I make that as easy as possible, basically? All right. So by the way, all that's mostly about building and shipping. I don't do testing of Docker files. I mean, I probably should do a linter in that pipeline. So maybe if you know how to do that, you can help me out in the chat, and I'll add that to some of my GitHub workflows. But anyway, so before we get to the questions real quick, just quick, if this is your first time here, check out my Patreon. So there's a couple of links here. If you just go to my website, there's 3 links up top. You go to my website, you can get to Patreon, or you can just go to patreon.com/Bret Fisher. That's how you support this show and support the other things I do, like all this open source, all the free videos I make, the podcasts, I would say newsletter, but I haven't shipped a newsletter in 4 months, so I'm not sure if it's really a newsletter. Maybe it's a quarterly newsletter. That's a thing, right? I could do quarterly newsletters. So yeah, there's lots of stuff I do there. So if you want to give me a coffee every month and get access to exclusive benefits, you can, but you don't have to. Just scroll down in Patreon and click the follow button, and then you will get updates on everything that I create of significance. So you won't get an update when I've put a new PR into some GitHub repo, but you will get updates when I've made a new piece of content that's free, or I've done a major update to one of my Udemy courses, or I've got a guest on my show and you might want to come see that topic. I've decided to not even bother you with updates when I'm going live, because I go live every week at the same time. So if you've been here long enough, you know that I'm here every Thursday. So I'm not going to bug you about that unless you all want me to. Because we all get too many updates, too many notifications. So I'm trying to use Patreon as the way you only get the things from me that are new and significant. And so that you won't get bugged by me on 1,000 tweets or 1,000, Facebook updates or whatever. So that's really what that's happening. The other thing is our Discord server. So if you go up to the very top right on the window, you can see the URL. You can go to devops.fan. And you can hang out in our DevOps chat with thousands of other DevOps people, all learning DevOps, doing DevOps as a profession in their job. And today we were actually talking about swarm stuff. And Eric mentioned a new bug in readiness probes for Kubernetes. And yeah, we've got a lot of stuff going on in there. Usually there's a good chat in one of the channels every day. And we're only getting started. So join us. It's free, no obligation. If you're part of the patrons High Fiver Club, you get access to a few channels up here where we have private Patreon chat, and then we do a monthly High Fivers video hangout where we all just kind of have a lunch hangout, and which has actually worked really well for me this year. I really enjoyed it doing that every month because I don't get to go to lunch with all my friends right now. And so it's nice to be able to meet new people and sort of replace a little bit of the meeting people at conferences, meeting your friends for lunch, that don't work at the same company you do anymore, all that stuff, right? So we've been doing that every month, so come check us out. And if you're in the chat right there, you can get on the screen for a second. So yeah. All right, let's get to some questions. I hear some little notifications there. Good. Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I'm glad it's warm again in Texas. Thank you. I just got the new Apple headphones. They are amazing, and I love them. And it's the first piece of Apple gear, besides the newest iPhones, where I feel like the battery life is sufficient. So much of my life, all of our lives, is charging things. So. I am not a Java person. I do build Java containers and help teams Dockerize their Java, but I am not going to be I'm not going to have any good advice on Java programming internals. So, sorry, Dan, maybe someone in chat can help you. I want to automate Nirav. Sorry if I mispronounced that. I wanted to automate Postgres databases in containers. How do we do that with volumes? I'm not sure what you mean by automate. Maybe be more specific, and you can put your question in multiple posts and maybe break it out, and then I'll come back to it. So I'm not sure what you mean by automate your databases. Are you talking about actually installing the database, like spinning it up for the first time? Are you talking about like database replication, mirroring? What are you talking about? Database migrations for your application? There could be lots of things that means. So help me out. Can you differentiate Docker on the dev role versus ops role? So not really. So to me, Docker on the ops role is more about sysadmin, right? Because ops primarily are more focused on the infrastructure to deliver your applications. As the developers making the applications, the operator is more about getting those applications up and healthy and making sure they're staying healthy and monitoring them. And infrastructure or traditional sysadmin duties might be a part of that ops role. So I would say if you're learning Docker, if you're learning containers, from a developer's point of view, you can sufficiently stop at learning the basics of Docker and then go straight to Docker Compose. Learn everything you can about Docker Compose. That is your primary workflow tool as a developer locally with containers, at least in my mind. That's how you should start. There's always more advanced tools. You can get into scaffolding, Kubernetes, and all these other ways to develop your application while using containers to develop. But you start with Docker Compose because that's the simplest and most feature-rich one out there. And then day to day as a developer, you're using Docker Compose all day long. You're rarely ever typing an actual Docker command. You're typing Docker Compose commands. And then, that does mean you need to know a little bit about Docker files, a little bit about Docker Compose files, the YAML. As an operator, you also need to know those things, I think. You at least need to know the basics of Docker Compose because you probably will use it a little bit locally. You definitely need to know a Docker file so that you can make sure you understand that what the application needs to run in order to successfully run. How do you health check it? What are the health checks that are either in that Docker file or in the YAML when you're doing Kubernetes? And then as an operator, you will go farther into the depths of Kubernetes. Now, as a developer, you do probably need to understand the basics of Kubernetes. And what are the basics, right? It's more about what is the Kubernetes API? What are the built-in Kubernetes objects? We call them resources, but the API endpoints that you might use as a developer. And then you need to know how to write a few basic Kubernetes YAML files to describe your app. The key for developers to be able to describe how your app should be installed in the Docker file and how it should run in the Compose file and in the Kubernetes files, Kubernetes manifest. Maybe a Helm chart if you get advanced. But I wouldn't. If you're a developer, I wouldn't honestly worry too much about Helm at first because someone else will be able to convert your manifest file into Helm if you end up using Helm. You don't always have to use it. All right, so an operator is definitely focused on Helm and Kubernetes. And if you're an operator that becomes a Kubernetes cluster admin, that's when you have to know all of Kubernetes. That's when you have to know the depths of all the commands and the debugging and all the various ways that you use a Kubernetes command line. You also should probably learn as an operator sysadmin who's managing infrastructure, you should go deep into things like how does Docker work? What are the IP table rules that it uses? How does that work? How does the Kubernetes kubelet run on a machine? What is the command line to do that, right? So you're going to be more experienced in understanding of how the lower level these things run on servers, whereas developers, in some cases, can not care about that. They can just focus on their application and how it's supposed to run inside these containers. Anyway, that's a summary. Probably went a little long on that one, but that's a great question. Thank you so much. Kamaraju. I'm going to try that. I think you told me last time how to say it. I'm going to try it again. I think I forgot already. Sorry about that. Bitmonkey. How are you preventing a long-running query blocking the health check and causing the container to get unhealthy in a Python Flask and Unicorn REST service? That's a great question. So I'm assuming you're talking about a single, you're running Python directly, or if you're running Unicorn, you're not running multiple threads. So this is a thread blocking problem. That is an actual interesting question. So what you'd probably need to do is come up with a health check that runs Python in that container that does something else. Because if you're thread locking on long threads, there's nothing, I'm not sure how you can, on long task inside a thread blocking everything, I don't see a fix for that, right? That's a programming problem. So you're going to either have to deal with multiple threads, or you're going to have to create something else in that container that just doesn't talk to that, like a more simplistic health check maybe. A similar question is often people ask, how do I do health checks when I don't have a listening port? If it's not a web service, how do I health check it? And the simplest thing that I've always come up with is to have an application, have that application itself on a regular basis outputting a file to the file system inside the container that your health check checks that file. Basically, you could simply do the simplest version is your application every 5 seconds touches a file, which changes the date. And then your health check checks that that file has been touched in the last 5 seconds, so it checks the date on it. Or you might put a line in that file every 5 seconds that puts certain statistics or something, maybe even metrics if you want to get fancy enough. And then your health check and even your metrics runners are checking that file for updates. Because not every, like worker apps don't have a TCP endpoint, so you can't get at them remotely unless you want to add that to those workers, which is perfectly reasonable, simply for the act of easier health checks and easier metrics. But if you want to do that to a local file, and don't necessarily put it on a volume, don't make it complicated, just put it in the container, have the health check for that file in the container, and check the status of the file. If you have a thread problem, that's going to still be the same problem there, though, because if it's too busy to execute an internal loop, then it's not going to help you there either. So I don't have actually a great answer on that. I think honestly, multiple threads is node is also the same issue, right? Like if you have a long running operation in a single node executable, you could potentially fail a health check there. Complete Docker lab exercises for learning. Well, go to bretfisher.com/Docker. I have tons of resources there, not just my courses, but also other videos I've done, example repos, stuff like that. Contribute. Yeah. So if you want to contribute to any or help me with any of my open source, so just go over to GitHub. So GitHub/Bret Fisher, and you will see my biggest repos there. And then if you just go to my repositories and I don't know if it sorts by latest updated. I think it does. Yeah. So it sorts by updated, and so you can start looking at what I'm working on. Some of these, there is a thing in the fall for DigitalOcean called Hacktoberfest in October, and for Hacktoberfest, I tend to create issues of features and things. So go check it out. I'd say go find the things that you're most interested in using, try to use them, and then let me know, put issues in if does it not work. For example, something that we can get into today, I have been starting to update based on the last week's show and a show from last month, talking all about ARM and the M1, getting my repos all updated to have a manifest file so that you can run any of my examples on ARM or on Intel x86 64. So that means doing several things, building containers in different architectures, or as we call it in Docker world, platforms, different platforms. That's something I'm doing. So you could do that. You could create a PR, have it building using multiple outputs so that essentially you can run all of my stuff on Raspberry Pis as well as on an Intel computer. Anyway, that's something as an example if you wanted to help out. So I appreciate all the help. Thank you so much for even offering. That's what open source is all about. All right, let me catch up on some of the questions here. Any advantages of using Docker containers with AWS Amplify, AppSync, Cognito within a microservice architecture? Tim, I'm not going to be an expert. I have used none of those AWS services. But anytime you can use containers, I would say there's an advantage. The reason is that the container image becomes the standard no matter where you run it. If you're using AWS specific services and then later you want to try that thing you're doing there somewhere else, then if you're not using container images, then you have to adhere to whatever standard that is. That's why so many of these services on the internet are adhering to the OCI standard for how you build a container image and making that the deployable object, right? Now, in some function serverless stuff and in some static website stuff, it may not make sense I still think with functions, largely, everything should be a container image. How they run it is really up to them, but how you build it and package it and then distribute it, because often like these things that exist in AWS, you have to run it locally. And so how do you run it locally as close to what they're doing locally? That's containers. That's usually how you do that. So I don't know those 3 services, so someone else in chat may have a better answer for you. But that's how I do it. There are a few things like Netlify. Netlify is a service that simply looks at your GitHub repo and then will make a website out of that. It's kind of like GitHub Pages, but a little fancier. And I don't actually make containers for Netlify. I do make container images for when I want to do that stuff, I do it locally, when I'm editing it on it locally. But they do their own thing, so I just have to point them directly at GitHub. I don't have to tell them which images to run. So there are tools like that, and if you have tools that can point directly at your source code, and you don't have to create totally separate build files just for their thing to work, then it sounds great. But if I had to maintain 2 sets of build instructions, that's when I start to feel like, okay, we probably should standardize on a container here, because I really only want one deployable object and 1 set of build instructions for my apps. But that's just me. What type of containers does managed services like ACI, ECS, and GCE? They're all the same. They all use the standard Docker file, building a standard image. It's known as OCI. That's the standard that we help create the image format that is essentially just a bunch of tarballs and some YAML, or JSON, really. Some JSON metadata. All your files are in a tar, and it's moved around the internet over HTTPS. So all those services operate the same way in terms of how they consume your app. So your job is to take your app, wherever it's stored, in Git, usually, and then make a Docker file and get that built and stored in some image registry, whether that's Docker Hub or Google Cloud registry or AWS ECS registry, or Azure's, like they all have registries for your images. And so your job is to get your apps into those registries. And then things like ECS, GCE, ACI, those will all consume those images. All right, and Rav, let's see. Install Postgres server with some default application databases, schemes using Dockerfile. Run some database scripts while containers run first time create. So go several things. Start out looking at Docker Hub. Just go look at Docker Hub for Postgres. It gives you a bunch of information in that README about where you put your SQL files for automatically being imported as, adding records to your database, right? You can do that through the instructions are there on Docker Hub. So just go look at that image. When you're talking about servers, you're going to probably talk about Kubernetes and look at then some of the examples for how to use like a Helm chart in Kubernetes for automatically building a database cluster, or maybe there's an operator that you can look at. But that's way more advanced. I'd say for local use, just with local Docker on your machine for learning and developing, you really just need to know how that image runs by default on Docker Hub and how to inject scripts. And all of that is in the README. So if you just go Hub, Postgres, if I just search for .sql, you'll see their initialization scripts. It's all there. Tells you where to put them, how to format them, examples of how to automatically, every time you spin up the container. And so when you do this, you would use Docker Compose. And in Docker Compose, you would bind mount your SQL scripts or your shell scripts. You would bind mount those inside your Docker Compose file. And then every time that the container spins up, it will run those things. So go check that out. Yeah. Thanks, Eric, for that. I agree. Monitor database health at the simplest level for database health. You're going to look up Docker's health check library. So I will put this actually in chat because this is not one that people know about a lot of the time. So at the simplest level, the Docker health check command inside of something like Docker or Docker Compose or Docker Swarm, that's the simplest. Usually what you'll graduate to is doing it in Kubernetes. But these still can apply to Kubernetes. You're probably just going to get more advanced as you get to Kubernetes. But here's a great way to get started, because Docker has this library of health checks. They're all focused around persistent storage, database solutions, right? Redis queues, Postgres, Elasticsearch, all these things. And so they will show you examples of the scripts you will run. And the answer is different for every database technology. So for example, on Postgres, it's going to run a query against the database to basically, you'll see here, it does a select statement. It selects one row. All right. And in order to do that, it needs your database password, your database username. And so all of that is done by, it adds this to the Docker file. So you can see they actually even give you the Docker file. So you can see in here that it's copying in the health check script, and then it will change the health check of your image so that it knows which script to run. That's only done by Docker and Docker Compose and Docker Swarm. This health check command will be ignored by Kubernetes because it's more complex. So you'll need to look up health checks in Kubernetes once you get there. But you can still use this health check inside of Kubernetes. You would just need to add it yourself, or bind mount it in, which is my preferred way. I prefer to bind mount it in through a config file, simply so that I can avoid having my own custom images of databases. I'd rather use just the official image database if I can, just so I have less to maintain. Great question, though. Can I make these a bit earlier? I'm joining from India, and I really don't want to miss these live streams for sure. So I'm trying. I hear you. I'll be honest. The answer is probably not, just because I'm on East Coast US, and so there is already other live shows that I would conflict with. So if you want an earlier show, Docker does a show where they're actually live streaming an hour before me. So you can actually go check out Docker on YouTube and watch them. And so I wouldn't want to conflict with them. So then I'd have to go even earlier in the day on Thursday. And I am not a morning person, which is why I'm still drinking coffee in the afternoon. So I also want to make sure that I don't avoid people in Eastern Europe, which we have a lot of people there too. So it is hard. And I hear you. I'm sorry, Yusuf, that these are going to be tough for you. You can watch them later. They come in later, and I do reply to questions and comments. So if you have questions after the live stream and you put them in comments, of course, YouTube has, it is YouTube. So people put stuff in comments that I deliberately ignore. There's just a bunch of garbage and things. But if you have questions, put them in there. Also, go check out another plug for the Discord, right? Join the free Discord. That's devops.fan right there. And then you can ask questions there ahead of time. Ping me. So this is something I haven't said you could, I haven't talked about this, but you could totally do this. Go into the Discord and at me. So at Bret Fisher in the Discord before the show. So let's say you don't want to stay up late to watch this. So go in there, ask your questions, knowing that I'm going to be live on Thursday, and I will write them down and make sure that I answer them in the show. So that way, when you watch the recording later, you can get your answers if that's what you want to do. Of course, you can always have the discussion in the chat, and people there will try to help you if they're around and they, know what you're talking about and they have advice. But you can do that, right? You can do it asynchronously with me. But I'm probably not going to change my live time because there are a lot of people that are involved with this show. I have my wife is the producer, and I have co-marketing with other groups, and we've all made sure that basically we're not going to step on each other's toes when it comes to live streaming. So I'm trying to stick to my 1 o'clock Eastern US time slot. So I hear you though. I thought long and hard about exactly when can I get the most audience and everyone be participant in it. If I could do more live streaming, if I had more time, I would do a live stream at late night. I actually have a domain name. I think it's called Docker or latenightdocker.com, I think, as I own that. So I had this idea of doing like a late night stream where I'm just working on stuff and I'm just, chit-chatting, kind of a Twitch kind of thing. But I just don't have the time to do it, so I've not done much of it. But put in comments if you want to see that, because if a lot of people asked for it, I might be tempted to just do it, every couple of weeks or once a week or something, if I can make it happen. But I would be pretty busy. It's pretty tough to do stuff at night. Yeah, thanks, Conrad. Thanks for those comments. Yeah, the global interpreter lock. That's a tough thing. I think honestly, if you have the potential for a long running task in Python that could last longer, like let's say your health check is every minute, all right, every 60 seconds. Because I really don't advise like 5-second health checks in most cases. If you do that, if you need that level of that speed of a health check, you're probably going to consume a lot of resources by doing the health check every 5 seconds. So I usually do something like a 1-minute health check or a 30-second health check. So let's say your app takes 30 seconds to do something on a single function or a method. So I would probably look at re-architecting that method or just scale out, right? Like scale out so that 30-second thing doesn't have to happen. In other words, actually that may not help, because if you get if you know that thread is going to take 30 seconds every time you do it, you maybe need to, I don't know. I feel like it's a re-architecture problem there. So thank you for that. That's a great discussion. I've actually not had a team have that problem, but I could see how it could easily happen in Python, especially in Node, especially if you're maybe writing out a file in Node or you're streaming something in Node. That could be a problem. You might just need to lengthen your health check time until you can re-architect. Just make your health checks take longer. And you just have to realize that you maybe don't have health status on your app for a minute or 3 minutes or whatever. I mean, sometimes a 5-minute health check is totally fine. If you have enough redundancy, you're confident that all these things are working. And if one container goes bad, then the thing about Kubernetes too, Kubernetes kind of takes care of this. And I don't know if anybody said this in chat. So, so you have multiple health checks, right? So you have liveness and readiness. And this is actually a perfect example, probably. I should probably put this in as an example in my courses, because this is actually potentially a perfect example of a container that's busy doing something, but it should not receive new connections. So if you have an incoming connection and the load balancer in Kubernetes is smart enough to look at those two checks and say, oh, no, the container is actually fine. It's busy. I'm not going to send it new connections, though. So I'm going to send them elsewhere while it's busy. And so you might have a shorter check on there for new connections, but a longer check for whether or not it's truly busy or healthy or not. So look into the Kubernetes readiness and liveness checks, and you might figure out that you can use a really long one for one of them and a really short one for the other, and then that will help you. That'll help you architect it better in Kubernetes. Possible if I can share the latest DockerCon slides. So the last time I did a DockerCon talk was DockerCon 19. The last time they had a live DockerCon. So go look at that one. DockerCon 19, I have the slides in GitHub. So it's all my source code and the video. It's all about Node.js. But if you're not a Node.js person, it doesn't really matter, because that talk is about a lot of things that you have to concern yourself with on every type of application, regardless of whether it's Node. I just use Node as the example, but there's not a lot of Node-specific stuff in there. I talk about health checks. I talk about zombie processes and how Docker can possibly cause your application to consume a bunch of resources and be very bad. So how to get around that, using something like Teeny, which is an init process. Anyway, I go into a bunch of stuff, specifically around operations concerns like zombie processes, health checks, how to do multi-stage Docker files properly for your app, and all of that's in that talk. So go check that out. Can you use Cert Manager to get Let's Encrypt certificates? Yes, as far as I know. I've got an old SOAP service. Hello, Anton. There's lots of old SOAP services around. Is it possible to containerize it using Windows containers? Do Windows containers have any restriction for legacy Win32 apps in general? Not that I'm aware of. As long as they can operate on a modern Windows kernel. So you can still get, as far as I know, you can still get older versions of Visual C++, the .NET framework, Visual Basic even. You can get these things as long as you can install them with command line only. So you have to get a little bit smarter about how you use the commands for the MSI installer, right? So you have to kind of learn about that stuff and learn how to install it in a Docker file using CLI only. So because there is no GUI inside of a container in Windows containers. So you have to first figure out how to get all your dependencies in that Docker image, and then just copy in your source code. And you should be able to build it using MS Build, and then you should be able to run it in a container, which will basically run on a Windows 2016 or newer container image. So you're probably going to want to focus on like the Windows Server 2019 world, because that's kind of the latest. Anyway, yes, absolutely, you can do that, and it should work. I'm not saying I've done it exactly the way you're saying it, but I've seen lots of examples of getting the MSI installer to install some old app packages like DLLs and things from something like C++ in there using silent. Basically, you have to learn the switches, the options like /s and /i and a bunch of other ones to get it to install properly. But that's mostly about dependencies. Once you get the dependencies in the container image, you're just copying in your app and building it and then running it. Hey there, Khalil. Sorry if I messed that up. Yes. So go to bret.show/DevOps. I'm not saying it's a definitive example of how to get into DevOps, but I do have a short URL, bret.show/DevOps, because I get this question a lot. I'll put that in chat for you. But yeah, so I have an AMA on GitHub, and you can go check that out there. There's a lot of theory and stuff in there, but there's probably better answers on the internet. But that's my take on it. It's not a course. It's just an explanation of maybe some of the priorities, that things you need to learn about. Things like go learn GitHub, go learn a cloud, go learn versioning systems like Git, which is where GitHub came from, stuff like that. And good luck, by the way, with your master's degree and being a DevOps engineer. I'd say no, that is not true about Python. Zolt. The Python is just as real of a language as anything else. You can you can call it a scripting language simply because it's relatively easy to write a single file Python script in a script-like fashion, and then just run Python in the name of the script. But you can do that with Node. You can do that with a lot of languages. You can do that with Go. So I would argue that it's just as legitimate as a server language. I've lost count of how many companies I work with server programming all running in Python all day long, major websites running in Python all day long. So I'd say there's really, at the end of the day, no difference. How do you monitor Docker containers? The short answer to that conversation is look at all of the. We can talk about things like Python. I'm sorry, not Python. Like Prometheus, which is a very popular open source tool. But I would say you first need to learn about health checks, which is the basics, and then you learn about metrics. So look up like Docker metrics and container metrics, Kubernetes metrics, and you learn about how to monitor different statistics, and then just choose a tool and learn it. You can choose to learn something like Prometheus, or you can choose to learn something like Datadog or Sysdig, or AWS's built-in stuff for monitoring. So there's the monitoring world is vast and deep, and there's tons of tools out there. There is not a ton of standards. So that's part of the challenge is as you learn monitoring, there's not a ton of standards out there that really give you a framework for how they all work and how exactly they all run. It's kind of like CI systems. Every one of them has a different file format for configuring it. But generally, you have two types of things. So a lot of times when people think of monitoring, they think of logs, and that's not true. Really, you can monitor logs technically, but I think of it in two different things. You have logs, and you should be outputting a bunch of logs from your apps. And then you have metrics, which is how you collect metrics and chart things and graph things, right? And so that's when we say monitoring, I traditionally think of the metrics that you're outputting. And that can be everything from CPU to graphic, to memory, right? Memory utilization, CPU memory utilization, or it can be something like your website /metrics. And then when you do that, it outputs a bunch of numbers that are, maybe they're in the Prometheus standard, which is now a thing, where you actually output data that a monitoring tool can consume. But there's hundreds of monitoring tools out there, so I don't really have a recommended path on what to learn. I would say the quickest way to learn is to probably do a bunch of Googling, do a bunch of reading about container metrics, focus on containers, focus on Docker, and then go learn and play with Prometheus. Just because it's free, you can learn it. There's tons of resources for learning it out there. I don't have a course on it, but there are courses on it. You can learn that stuff. And then you will have the idea of how to do it one way. But hopefully in that process, you've learned about things like metrics endpoints and proper logging, that kind of stuff. So anyway. All right. So I'm going to take a pause from the questions for a little bit. And I'm going to go look at my app. So I just wanted to describe some of the things I'm working on lately. And maybe that'll prompt you with some questions. Maybe you'll have some questions about how I'm doing this stuff. And maybe you haven't played around with GitHub Actions. And I am by no means the expert here. So I'm learning as I go. I'm a little late to the ball because the only things I've really done so far are things like building images and pushing them to either GitHub packages or to Docker Hub and stuff like that. Maybe run some real basic CI commands like npm run test, stuff like that. But GitHub Actions, to me nowadays, if you're storing your code on GitHub and you're building something new, GitHub Actions is now the thing to beat. It's the table stakes minimum functionality that any continuous integration or continuous deployment tool you are going to use now needs to be better than what GitHub Actions can do. Because if it's already built into GitHub and it's just adding a couple of files into a directory called .github, why would you use extra tools? I'm not saying you shouldn't. All those tools probably have more features. But in the case of a project I'm on this week, I actually ran into a project where I'm working with Drone. Drone is another CI tool. I'm pretty sure there's a website, but I'm just going to go to I think it's drone.io. So drone.io. So Drone is an open source CI tool. There's lots of tools out there in open source. There's lots of automatic built-in functionality. You can do CI in lots of places. So a lot of people ask me, which CI tool should I use? Should I use Jenkins? If you're just starting out, it depends on what your role is. If you're wanting to get a job running Jenkins, then yes, you need to learn Jenkins. But if you're new to this stuff and you're just trying to learn how continuous integration, testing, and continuous deployment, how that stuff works, then I would not recommend Jenkins, because Jenkins is a huge thing. It's also been around forever, so it's quite complicated. And I think it actually allows you to use bad habits. We actually talked about this yesterday in our DevOps chat that you could be a part of with my Patreon membership. If you're in Patreon, you get to be in a monthly video hangout, and we talked about tools in DevOps allowing you to do bad things, bad habits. You're basically doing things the wrong way or not the recommended way by default because of certain tools allowing you to do that. And Jenkins is definitely one of them. Jenkins is like a generic tool that lets you do anything you want to do in an automated way. It'll run scripts on every commit. It'll create bad habits, right? So it's more of a job scheduler in my mind than it is a specific tool for building a container image, testing the container image, and then deploying it. So when we look at something like GitHub Actions, let's look at this repo, for example. GitHub Actions has lots of different actions that you can put in your workflows. But for me, the most common one in the container world is when I make a commit and push to this repo, build the image, test the image, and then push it to a registry. That's like the simplest thing to me. And I want to test inside the image. I want the image to I want to know if it successfully built the image. And then I want to know, assuming that it's been tested, that it's pushed to a registry. Maybe that's Docker Hub. Maybe that's GitHub packages. Maybe that's AWS, somewhere else. And since it's already built into GitHub and I get a little bit for free, might as well use that, right? That to me is like the minimum functionality. Now, in the past, I was using Docker Hub to do that. The problem with Docker Hub, one of the problems, is that Docker Hub doesn't let me specify anything here in my repo. I have to go into Docker Hub. So let's go to, for example, clock. So this is an image. Let me go to public view. So if you were to look at this image simply puts the date timestamp every second on your standard out. So it standards out in a container every second, the time. Okay, very simple, super simple little thing. But if you see here, if I were to go manage this repository, I have to, when I want to set up auto building and building the image and all that, I do all that here in Docker Hub. I can't do that from YAML. I can't put it in my GitHub repo when I change those things. I have to do it all in Docker Hub, which I don't pretend to like. I don't like that workflow. It's easy if you like to use Docker Hub. If you like to use the GUI, that's great. But, sorry, let's go back over here. I can see the status of the builds. I can see a lot of things in Docker Hub, so that's not the bad part. It's that when I want to change it, if I want to go to settings, if I want to go to builds and set up auto building, I'm configuring all that stuff here, not in my code. So to me, this is an anti-pattern of not using infrastructure as code. So I much more prefer the method. I'm going to get rid of that one. Get rid of that tab. I much more prefer the method of putting all of my steps in code with the app, usually with the app, not always. So here, you'll actually notice in this repo, what is this repo? So this repo is something that I use to store lots of little utilities that I use for my courses. And when I do my talks and example stuff that I might do in a conference talk or in a live stream or something. So I've got a bunch of Docker files here, and I've got some Kubernetes YAML. I don't think I have any Compose YAML. I think it's all Kubernetes YAML and Docker files. And then what I do behind the scenes is, it's actually, let's see. Nope. That's Kubernetes YAML. I think it's here. Yeah, so this this one file is not super obvious, but I use Netlify. I use Netlify to make that repo a website. so that all those files are just statically served up. Okay. So Netlify looks at my GitHub repo every time I change my repo, it will simply take all the files there and then put them on a website. And that website just happens to be bret.run. So if I go to the root of that repo, basically Netlify knows that if you just type in bret.run, it actually redirects you to my GitHub. But if I were to type in bret.run/pod. I think it's YML, it's going to try to download a YAML file. And it's like, hey, how do you, it wants to open it with Xcode. But obviously I don't want to do that. But it's going to try to download a YAML file. So the way that I use that is I can do things in Kubernetes that way. So I can go to the command line and do things like kube control, apply, HTTPS, bret.run/pod.yaml. So I could run that and it would actually, on any machine that I have kube control access to, I can then create a pod that's a sample pod running. I think it just runs Nginx. I can cat that just to show you. Does bat work there? No. I have to cat. Didn't know if bat works. Sorry, not cat. What am I saying? Curl. Gee whiz. So if I curl that, cat cannot take a URL. That is not a thing. Curl here, so I can curl this. You can just see all I'm doing is this is a basic manifest file coming out of the manifest for Kubernetes. So that's not really what we're talking about here, though. That's not the focus of what we're doing. But if I come back over here, I'm going to close Docker Hub for now. So if I come back over to this repo, the whole point is I want an easy way to run some of my YAML. I just would love a URL over HTTPS so I can guarantee that the connection is safe. I'm not getting like a man in the middle replacing my YAML with rogue code or anything like that. So I'm always running it. So that's what Netlify does for me, is it just takes this repo, makes it a website. And then in here, I have a bunch of Docker files. Now, what I did was I then wanted, instead of editing all these things in Docker Hub through the Docker Hub website, I simply wanted to define in a YAML, in this repo, build my images, push them to Docker Hub. Like that's what I wanted to do. Super simple. So I created this, just a single YAML file inside of .github/workflows. And it uses the Docker action. Docker actually has actions here. And so you can see like Docker here. This is actually pretty small, sorry. So I'm basically saying here, if I push to the master branch, and I need to change this because I actually need to change this so that it does it on PRs. I also need to change the default branch from master to main, but whatever. I'll do that later. I actually don't know yet if GitHub has that one-click thing they were supposed to do to change master into main, but probably someone in chat knows. But the steps I've got here are the next. So basically, I did it very easy. I did it in a simple little workflow. The problem is it only gave me Intel images. So then last time, I looked up examples on how to do multi-builds on different architectures, different platforms, so that I could have this image built for each one of these utilities on on most supported platforms that Docker could build. And so I found this example where I could use QEMU, which is a architecture emulator that allows me to, for example, run ARM inside an Intel machine. And then, so I set up this action to basically automatically sort of set up, it sets up and installs QEMU basically. And then I say that I also want to use BuildX, so set up BuildX for the modern Docker way to build containers using BuildKit. And then I have it log into Docker Hub because that's where I'm going to push the image. I could just as easily use GitHub packages here, but I still kind of want the Docker-friendly URL advantage. So I want to be able to type in like Docker run Bret Fisher /clock, right? And then for each one of these, I have a different step in this workflow. So this one will build the clock image, and then it has the platforms that it will build on, because now I can do multi-architecture builds or multi-platform builds. So I'm saying build on AMD 64, which is the x86 64 we all know, and then I want you to build on ARM version 6, version 7, and then version 8, the latest version of ARM processor architecture. So now it's going to build all 4 images, and then it's going to put them all in a manifest file and then push them up to Docker Hub. I have push true, and then just make it latest, because these are the simplest little tools and I don't really need to version them like real production code should always be versioned. I'm just going to push to latest. Okay? So all of that is, so once I've got all the setup done, this is what I need to do for each tool. And so I just repeat it. I repeat it over and over again. I've got it doing it for date now. I don't yet have it for this facepalm because I'm having a hard time with this particular. Basically, what this does is this little tool runs ImageCat, and it will, in your command line, it will actually print out a graphic, and it currently only works in iTerm, and I want it to work on all shells using ASCII color. So I'm trying to find the right solution for that. Basically, I need to find better cross-architecture ASCII color support for terminals. Kind of a nerdy thing, I know, but it was a fun little thing I did in my courses. So, all right. And then we do things like ping pong. Ping is something where you can connect and you can send a ping to it and it'll pong back. And then top, so it automatically runs top inside your container, stuff like that. All right, so these are just all your little utilities that I'm repeating over and over in a single workflow file. So it will build them one after the other, step by step. And one of the problems with this is monorepo. So what is a monorepo? A monorepo in general, there's probably lots of definitions for it, but a monorepo is where you've got different purposes for the same repo. So in a microservice architecture, you might have a bunch of different microservices and each one is in its own directory, but they're all in the same repo. Now, there are pros and cons to monorepos. I'm not trying to get into that. Go Google monorepo pros and cons, and you'll find a bunch of people talking about the pros and cons of them. Great arguments on both sides. But in my case, I have Dockerfile monorepo. So I have many Docker files. And the problem I face right now is that anytime I change anything in this repo, that whole workflow will always run. So it will always rebuild all these things over and over again and push all of them, even when I only change one file. So I might change the Docker file for clock, and it will still rebuild date and push it. And I don't really need to do that. I don't need it to push date when I've only changed clock. This is also the same problem if you have a monorepo with different sets of code. So the way you solve that in CI typically is that you have to have a CI solution that has filters on Git. So it knows how to look at the Git diff, and it knows how to tell, does this commit include certain files in certain directories? And if it doesn't, don't run this workflow. So that's kind of advanced, but that is kind of the table stakes minimum you need to do CI and CD on a monorepo. Otherwise, every time you make a commit, everything is built, everything is pushed, and then everything is deployed, typically, because now that you've got new images, you would probably auto-deploy all those images to your servers. And you don't necessarily want to do that. That's a huge burden on your infrastructure. So that's something I'm working on in my other projects right now. So what I realized was GitHub does have a feature that solves this. They have something called the PAS filter. So I can add a filter that says, hey, if, for example, I'm going to actually use the include one. I don't want to ignore. I want to actually include. So this one, basically what I would do is I would say on push, if it's in a certain path, then run this workflow. Okay, so then what I would do is I would set my workflow up so that if it changes a specific clock Docker file, then build clock. Otherwise, don't build clock. Okay, does that make sense? So that I'm not rebuilding things unnecessarily in this repo. Now, in my case, what I really want to do here is I want to actually create directories for all these things, put them in their own directory, and then I will put the pass, I will put directory include statements in there so that it's nice and clean. I want to clean this up. It's a little confusing right now because I've made these all in one directory and they're kind of weird. So anyway, so that's the next step I want to do here. Then what it's going to do is I'm going to go check Docker Hub to make sure they're running. And then maybe I probably need to fancy this up. So what I did is I went and created an issue for myself because I'm pretending I'm working in a team, even though this is a team of one. So I make an issue. So then I need to use, GitHub flow type of work where I created a branch to solve this issue. I got a new branch. I just created it. This one right here. Then I'm going to make a PR for that branch, and I'm then going to change the file in that branch, and it will update in that PR. And then when it all works, I will push it. Something else that's going to happen here is that if I want to allow this workflow to run on PRs, I should not have my workflow set to always do latest, right? I don't want the tags to build latest in a PR because that would overwrite while I'm testing. So I will need to figure out a way so that when I'm in the master branch, build and push the latest. But when I'm in a PR branch, name the image and tag it with the name of the PR, let's say, proper name of the PR. So I've also got to fix that, right? That's probably another issue I need to create. It's probably a bug. All right, let's go. I'm going to go look at some questions real quick because I've been talking for like 10 minutes. John, course request. Could you create some courses on Docker Desktop for developers, like doing Vue.js with an API? I have the Docker for Node.js, so I would honestly recommend that course to you. So if you just go to bretfisher.com/courses. So I'm probably never going to do a course where I'm teaching you, like Vue.js, for example. Vue.js is a framework for a front end, and I'm probably not going to create a course specifically for that because I'm not a Vue.js developer, right? But the way you use Docker tools doesn't really change whether you're a Node.js developer or a Vue.js developer, or if you're using Python or some other scripting language, even Ruby, right? I would argue that I'd say 80% of the stuff in my Node.js course here is applicable to all scripting languages. Basically, what I mean by scripting language is a language that is not precompiled, like Go or Rust or C. And then I'd say at least 70% of that course is applicable to everyone who's a developer. And so I focus a lot on things like dealing with init processes or health checks, or how do you set up your compose file for proper development using something like VS Code, right? All those different types of nuances of a developer locally. Most of my time is spent on you understanding the Docker file, the different stages of it, the multi-stage development as a Docker developer, and then how do you run that locally for a proper dev environment, especially when you do things like in production, I'm going to run the node executable, but when I'm developing locally, maybe I want the development server, like I want NodeMon running locally, or I want Webpack's dev server running locally because I'm using Webpack, or something like that, right? So that you have to change your stuff while it's in local development, but with the goal in mind of the code is the same and the build is exactly the same, whether I'm developing or whether I'm in production. So all of that's in the Node.js course, so go check that out. Plug in my courses, like I do. Can I contrast GitHub Actions versus GitLab? So GitLab does way more than GitHub Actions. GitLab has been around longer, and you're going to get, like GitLab itself is a huge project, does lots of things. There are plenty of comparisons on the internet. On GitHub, I would say it's better to compare GitHub as a whole to GitLab as a whole, because both of them do lots of things. I am not a GitLab. I don't use GitLab every day, so I am not going to be super savvy on which things GitHub Actions can do and which things GitLab workflows can do. We're relatively early in the GitHub Actions game. Has it been out? Like maybe 2 years, not even that long. So, for example, they recently just, under the Actions tab, you can see that I have these workflows, and they just recently started showing visualizations. Recently, meaning I think within the last year. And sadly, mine's only a single step, so it's kind of boring. A single job with, multiple steps, but a single job. So it's a little boring to look at, but this is still pretty basic. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not showing it. So when you're in GitHub, you're looking at, you can click on Actions, and you can get some job status visualizations, some of this stuff in here, but it's not going to be, from my view, it's not going to be near as advanced as stuff in GitLab, but it's easy, and it comes out of the box. Now, if you're storing your code in GitLab, if you're doing all these other things in GitLab, stay with GitLab. But I try to, when needed, I try to limit those tools. So I am definitely, honestly, not the right person to ask about feature comparisons and which one's better for your use case. I would definitely not be the person to ask if you should switch, because I'm just not using both of them day to day in the same way and comparing all their functionality. Like, GitHub now has workspaces, so I can actually develop code on their website without ever leaving it. It's actually pretty great if you like Visual Studio Code, and it allows me to sit at any computer with a browser and do so much of my job, from creating the code, editing the code, PRing the code, testing the code, workflows to the code, like security scanning the code, all that stuff. I can now do all that on GitHub. And I'm not saying that GitHub is the only thing that does that. Like, there's tons of competitors that all do that too. It's just we're entering a world where you now need to focus as a developer and your tooling on an ecosystem. These are all becoming ecosystems. GitLab is essentially now an ecosystem. Azure is becoming an ecosystem, but they're really starting to move all their stuff to GitHub now that they own it. And AWS is an ecosystem of tooling where they want you to do everything there. They want you to develop there. They want you to store your code there. They want you to iterate on your code there. They want you to store your Docker images there, and then they want you to run your code there. They have code, whatever the code thing is on AWS. It's I used to actually use it for a while. I've totally forgotten what it's called, but they probably renamed it to some weird name. But yeah, they have their own code spaces up there on AWS as well. So. Jenkins fans left the chat. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a fan of GitHub. I'm sorry, I'm not a fan of Jenkins just because of the complexity. I use it almost every week for various projects because companies use it everywhere. Everyone, it is like 50% of the market at least. Like, it's a huge product, but it just, for new people and people that don't understand the cloud native way to get workflows done, the GitOps way of doing things, it allows you to do all sorts of bad things, like put things in scripts instead of in declarative language, right? You can do scripting when you really shouldn't. You really should put things as much in declarative language like YAML as you can. And you can do that in Jenkins, but it lets you do all these other things that you shouldn't do as well. So a more focused tool like Drone or GitHub or Circle CI or something like that. What microphone am I using? I am using the Rode Podcaster. If you want to see all my tools, go to, is it Kits? It's not kits.com. Yeah. So kit.co. So if you go to kit.co/Bret Fisher, I'll put this in chat. You can see almost all the hardware and software that I use for my live streaming, my recording. So I have like portable kits, home kits. I think it's up to date. I haven't really changed much this year. But I do need to check it. I might have some new lights that are not in here because I'm using the Elgato lights now. But all that stuff's in there. And if you buy something from there by clicking the link, I get a little chunk of money. I get like $1 if you do that. So thank you if you do that. Yeah, Biker's saying I got the demo for GitLab. I mean, GitLab's one of those things where eventually, if you're in DevOps, you might need to learn it or run into it. But it's like everything else in DevOps. There are 1,000 tools to solve every problem right now. So there is not a clear standard best path, easiest path. So I tend to look at what are the tools that I'm using in this project right now, and I'm going to try to use those tools to begin with for everything. Once I've started to do that, if I realize that tool just doesn't do it, then that's when I'm going to, or it doesn't do it well or easy, I'm going to shift to a different tool. I am not honestly a big fan of 10 different tools to do the same thing that 2 can do, because it tends to, those tools tend to be very complex, and every tool is adding more and more features. Very, very few tools in the cloud nowadays are obeying the do one thing and one thing well Unix philosophy. That's not happening, right? Everyone's trying to get more and more market share of everything. So everyone's adding new features, for better or for worse. So I'm always trying to, that's why for the longest time I was using Docker Hub to build images, because I always used that tool. But now that GitHub Actions has matured and it's got official Docker supported Docker actions, and those actions are relatively easy to set up, and I can use those most of the time for free. I don't run over my limits of GitHub Actions. I do technically pay the $5 a month or whatever for GitHub, but you get some of that stuff free out of the box, and it's more feature rich than what you can do at Docker Hub. So now I'm switching over to GitHub Actions for all that stuff. I'm still storing my images in Hub because people are used to that, used to finding them there. Maybe someday I might load them on GitHub packages as well as Docker Hub, maybe just because, but I haven't started doing that yet. All right, thanks, Yusuf. Thanks for that feedback. Yeah. I also wanted to get friends involved. Like if I have some friends that want to just hang out and have a glass of bourbon or a glass of wine or something and chit chat, maybe I can do that more casually on some weeknights. If I'm not raiding in World of Warcraft. I don't raid in World of Warcraft. That's not a thing I do. But so that was a joke. I do play some World of Warcraft Classic, though. I'm just reading the chat here, Thanks, Sander. Great Docker Node course. I appreciate it. Yeah, that was one of my favorites. Doesn't sell a lot, but it was one of my favorite courses to do. Yeah, and I mean, a lot of times it's learning the pattern for one particular project or one particular application, and then just repeating that pattern over and over, right? So the first time, like whatever your first CI tool is, I honestly don't think that it should ever be Jenkins, because Jenkins is just a huge mess. So maybe your first CI and CD tool could be GitHub Actions, because that gets you in the mindset of writing YAML that's declarative, that it takes place inside of GitHub. It's not a ton to learn. I don't have to completely learn a whole separate tool and format. And their YAML is very similar to a lot of other YAMLs, like Circle CI, like Travis, and other things. And then if I find a job that needs to use one of these other tools, it won't be that big of a deal to learn it. It wouldn't be a big deal to learn Drone or, I don't know, which one haven't I mentioned right now? CodeShip, something like that. So it wouldn't be a big deal to learn those. But something like Jenkins, the problem is you have to take a whole course on just how to deploy it, install it, and how to add all the plugins that you need in order to do the things out of the box that you could just do with a small YAML file in GitHub Actions. So it's tough when you're trying to learn basic stuff on Jenkins. Oh, the one-click main is on GitHub. Oh, thanks, Conrad. I had not seen that yet, but I will go do that today for sure. I just didn't want to break things, and I've been breaking some things by changing the I was doing it manually a while ago, and that was breaking some stuff. So hopefully it doesn't break. My mono repo is humongous, 300 plus projects. Every rebuild consumes tons of RAM. So yeah, so that's the problem with the mono repo. So to me, if you're going to have a mono repo, you have to have a CI tool that you can at least, well, step one, separate out everything into its own directories as much as possible, and then have a CI tool that separates out the paths, because you really don't want to rebuild everything on a push, right? That's if that had to happen, then I would then force myself or my team to use separate repos for everything, because simply the CI tool didn't. In my mind, those are some of the things you have to have in place in order to support mono repos. Node is server side, not the same. You enrolled in that one. Okay, well, thanks, John. But it is the same for development, in my opinion. Like, because I do a bunch of front end stuff in examples, and it's all like the way your compose file is set up is 99.9% the same, because you basically have to bind mount your code, and then you need to override the command and possibly even the environment, the entry point, to process your code and spin it back up in the way that your framework does it, right? And I believe that I talk about all that stuff in that course. I'm just not maybe using Vue.js. So, but I appreciate your feedback. If you haven't gone through all that course and consumed it in a way that it's trying to apply it, if you have questions, and here's the thing I'll offer you. If you're in my Discord chat, up there, DevOps fan, if you're in that course and you don't know how to apply something in Vue.js, and you find that, for example, there's a video on changing the command to use nodemon when you're developing locally, so that it will automatically recompile your assets and restart Node every time you save locally while you're developing locally. If you're not sure how to apply that to Vue.js, because maybe changing the command to the Vue.js server, which I'm not sure which one that is, and I'm not sure if it's using nodemon or if Vue.js has a built-in server. If you're not sure how to do that, ask me in Discord. Ask me, ping me with my @ symbol @Bret Fisher, and I will do my best to help you with that and try to get it working. So I'll do what I can. I'm just not a Vue.js person, so sorry. Cloud9, thanks, Conrad. Code build, code pipeline, Cloud9, yep, all the things. Cloud9 was like the original editor. That was actually pretty cool back in the day. I just haven't used it in so long, ever since VS Code came out and you could run it. I mean, I now run VS Code on my iPad from a web browser, so it works. I have an old bias to avoid vendor lock-in. The reality is we're all vendor lock-in at this point. I mean, to me, what is an open source project if not vendor lock-in? Because there are very few open source projects, and here's my soapbox. There's very few open source projects that if it went dead, you would still use it, right? Like if all the developers on that, yes, you can fork it, yes, you can extend it, you can do whatever you want. Very few people I've seen, in fact, I don't recall the last time this happened, where let's say you're using, Docker, technically it builds open source. So, suddenly the project's dead because it's just not loved anymore. And you can still use it. You can fork it, keep it forever. But are you really going to maintain that and keep it secure and add new features? Like, you would probably shift to a different tool, right? Which to me is the same problem we have with vendor lock-in, which is I'm worried that the vendor will change things or do something I don't like. They'll charge more money, whatever. It's basically a reason to leave. And when I think of open source, there are projects that have gone dead. Like a lot of Docker tools have gone dead. Docker is famous for starting projects and then killing them, like Docker Machine or Docker Toolbox or Docker App. So Docker Cloud. I could just go on and on, right? So those, and a lot of those were open source and still are open source tools, but I'm never going to use them again because I'm not going to maintain it. So when I think about what is the concern of vendor lock-in, to me, it's largely about the cost of. That's just to me, but that's just my opinion, and I'm sure you have a different one, Biker. So let me know. The vendor lock-in problem is really, to me, the cost of switching when I no longer can use that due to the vendor's fault, right? Or the project manager's fault or whatever. It's either more expensive or it doesn't work the way that I want anymore, or it no longer, or I need a new feature. I guess if I need a new feature, that's not really their fault. But anyway, if Kubernetes was left, stopped being built on tomorrow, everyone would probably start leaving it eventually. I mean, someone I'm sure would fork it and keep it going. But like, I'm not going to take over Kubernetes by myself and run it, so I would switch. Which is the same problem as if a vendor stopped supporting a thing or replaced it with something else, and I didn't want to do that. So I feel like I'm locked in everywhere. Everything's a lock-in. So I hear you. Big ecosystems. But also, you could argue that Amazon and Azure, Amazon and AWS are super rich, got billions of dollars in cash. They're not going anywhere. So, where is the riskier lock-in, I suppose? So, yeah, that's true. With Eric saying, like Terraform would able you to abstract that out, right? But you're really just replacing one vendor project with another open source vendor project. So, I love Terraform. I would actually use Terraform as much as possible anyway. So I would be doing that. Yeah, and Jarek's got a great comment there. At least if you go to Jenkins, if you're on Jenkins, if you move to their declarative pipeline files, it will force you to get out of the scripting. Well, at least a little bit. It'll hopefully get you out of the scripting mindset and into the declarative format. And then when you need to switch, it's really just changing YAML formats, right? Or yeah. So that's great advice, Eric. Thank you. Yeah, because I have a lot of companies that have just tons of legacy Java Jenkins file script. All right, I converted John to Discord. Welcome to the Discord world. Yeah, and good luck, John. Let me know. I'd love to hear your feedback in Discord on how that's solving your Vue problems. And hell, you never know. I might throw a Vue like just one little nugget in that course as a, if you help me learn the Vue stuff, I might be able to throw in just a single lecture in there that basically says, hey, if you're doing Vue, these are the things in a compose file that you would change specifically for a front end kind of thing. Boxer. I don't know about Boxer. What is Boxer? DOS editor. I was a WordPerfect person. Back then, I wasn't doing a lot of coding in DOS, so I remember WordPerfect for DOS. I can't even believe that I remember the word WordPerfect. Right, gRPC dying, for example. Anyone? Hello, Sean. All right, so back to my thing. I caught up on chat. All right, so back at my example. If you were here 15 minutes ago, we were talking on my Bret run. I've got this workflow. And what I'm really going to just need to do is move a bunch of files. So my goal here is to only build each image in a mono repo if the files related to that app change. All right. So I'm in the Bret.run repo here. And I've got my single YAML file. So I'm going to keep this a single YAML file for now in GitHub Actions. And I'm also going to keep it a single job because I'm not going to break it up until later. But what I need to do here is, according to their website documentation, so I'm going to So this is part of the problem, I think, is I'm going to have to create different workflows. Yeah, because I probably can't do this per. Yep, on push. So I am going to have to break this up. And then I'm going to have a path here and basically say things like clock date something simple like this. Let's see what else I got here. Ping pong. Oh, this is probably boring to watch, isn't it? And then top ping pong, face palm, date, clock. All right, and then I'm going to probably have to split this out. And brief. Eric always trumps me with the old school knowledge. I thought I knew my 80s tech, but don't you have like a old IBM original keyboard with a PS2 connector converter? Always out teching me with the old school tech. All right. So all I'm going to end up doing is I'm just going to do all this in VS Code, for better or worse. So I'm probably going to need to copy and paste this file. Can I copy a file? I don't even know. Oh, well, I'll do it command line. So probably the right thing to do here, and I'm not an expert on the format of GitHub Actions yet, so wait, let me make sure I saved it. Did I save it? No, I did not. So we're going to just call these, what do I got to do? I have clock, date, ping pong, and top. Ping pong. Top, date, ping pong, and clock. And then I'm not going to do the one yet for facepalm because it's broke. So I basically, the nice thing is I will keep these small. And we're going to take out everything. So this is it. This is basically right here. This is the entire thing. So again, this is longer than your standard build push because I'm setting up QEMU and I need build X because I need to be able to do multi-environment builds, multi-platform builds. And down here, I'm adding the platform. And then under the file, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move all these files to those subdirectories. And then I'm going to change the context to, I think all I need to do is clock like that. I don't think I need to. So the Docker file is going to be in that directory. So this is a little bit cleaner. When I first set it up, it is what it is. Why do I have little warnings here? Paths is not allowed. Bret is calling me old. No, we're old. We are old. I'm not calling you old. Oh, John's back with a second course suggestion. Apple extended 2 keyboard. Whoa. Very nice. Very nice. Limited edition. Yeah, if you help companies prepare. Hey, I for New Year's Eve 1999, I was at work. So I was at work watching the network. At the time, I was in charge of 120 Cisco routers across the US, and I had to stare at the routers status because we just believed that somehow we didn't believe Cisco's firmware updates were going to work, so we were waiting for the clock to roll over, and we thought we would lose network connectivity to everybody because that was the panic we were all in. So my wife had to bring champagne to the office so that we could celebrate New Year's Eve. What's your Y2K story? I was watching Disney Channel. I wish I was watching Disney Channel that night. All right, so I think this should work, but it's telling me the paths won't work. So, oh, you know what? It's on push. So I need to tab. There we go. Yeah, incorrect type. Expected array. Expected sequence found. Okay. And I'll put in my single quotes just to be consistent. All right. No warnings. No warnings. This is one of the reasons why I like VS Code. Is it automatically? So I put in. By the way, I'm using GitHub Actions in VS Code, and under here I have GitHub Actions the extension, and I can see the workflows that are up there. I'm not even sure, but I'm wondering if I could run it locally. I don't actually know. I've not actually tried that. A lot of CI tools will let me test things locally, especially if they're Docker based, if they are using images. And this one is. This is all Docker images. So anyway, so I'm using that local GitHub Actions, which it'll also lint my YAML to keep me from getting in trouble. All right. All right, so I'm going to change these really quickly. Sorry for being boring. This is going to be date. And then down here, we're going to change the context to date. I no longer need a special file name because I'm going to keep it in its own directory. Oh, shoot. I don't have to change anything. Date. All right, so we're pushing to date. We're using the context date, file, Docker file, secrets, logging in. All right, so that's 2. And then, of course, I need to do, now, because this is more, I'm going to make it more monorepo specific. I like in a monorepo for everything to be in their own directories, and that way it's easier for me to use directory path filtering. So, let's see. Move date over. This is the most exciting live stream ever, isn't it? Clock. So you see what I'm doing there? So I'm that way I have clean separation, right, of all of my different concerns, because these two images are not related to each other. That they're really small and tiny. They only actually run CMDs. There's actually different examples. One's using a different syntax than the other one for the command, for example. And so these are super simple examples I use in my courses. I don't want to change the image location because the courses are set. So I don't want to change the URL you have to use. But I do want to make this a little bit more updated for GitHub Actions. And so we're going to delete that one. And then ping pong and top are my last two. And then the pain of you watching this boring part will be over. And we're going to do context of ping pong. Call it ping pong. Delete the rest of the garbage. Check for any squigglies. Squiggly, squiggly. Good. Okay. Top. And so then top, we're doing this. If you have any opinions on how to do this better, let me know. I'm only doing it the best I know how. In terms of using GitHub workflows, I will probably. How do I also do it on PRs? Well, so the next thing is to figure out how to do it on PRs, not just master. It may automatically do it on PRs to master, so maybe that's automatic. I'm not sure. And then I also need to have it tagged differently for PRs, so that might be a different workflow for PRs. I don't think I can have tag logic down here inside the Docker build push action. So, by the way, Docker has great documentation on this build push action if you go over to their workflow steps. So, oh boy, I don't know what that was. So over on their repo for it, you can see. So see how like they have logins, set up buildex, set up QEMU. So they've got lots of great documentation here on how to use it, including caching, a lot of things I'm not using, pushing to multiple registries. So I might want to do that if I'm going to build and push to GitHub packages as well as Docker files. So catching up on chat. Make sure you put a question mark if you have a question. That way I can easily scan the chat. Wrote code on the Commodore 64. I didn't run code, Mike. I didn't run code. I didn't use a Commodore 64, but I used something very similar. I used at least I believe it's similar. I used the Tandy Color Computer 2 and wrote BASIC. To be clear, more accurately, I wrote BASIC that I was reading out of books because I didn't know the language. So the way I learned it was to write examples out of books that were like this thick, little tiny paperback books. That was my first entry into programming. Thanks, Owen. Thanks for that compliment. I appreciate it. PRs just need on pull request. Oh, okay. Yeah. So on push and pull request. So yeah. So the problem is that I wouldn't want to put it in here because I wouldn't want it to build and push this image. Or maybe I just wouldn't want to push it at all. But if I wanted to test a PR image, I like testing PR images. Like on my local machine, in other words, I like the idea of being able to pull a PR image of the code change. So I might set up a different one. And I'm not sure if that's can't I specify multiple actions per file with the standard YAML syntax? I'm assuming I can with the 3 dashes. I'm assuming I can do that. And this one's done, right? This is top. So I've got 4 there, and then we did date, top. And then ping pong. All right, I think that it does it. We should have 4 directories, 4 different Docker files, then a workflow directory with 4, and then later I'm going to do the facepalm one. I might as well move it now. But facepalm does not. Actually, facepalm does work currently. And what is facepalm? So Docker run Bret Fisher facepalm. It's a really big image. I don't know why it's so big. Oh, I know why. It's because I needed. So this only works. This only works in iTerm, and I think I've only used it once during an example. It only works in iTerm because it uses a built-in feature of iTerm to actually put a real image up, so you get the full quality. But that doesn't work normally in a terminal because you would need to do ASCII conversion, and there are other tools that do it. But ImageCat, I think there's several tools out there called ImageCat. So, all right, so I think we're good to go. Oh, yeah, I need to change facepalm here. I probably could have just did a search and replace. And I think that's it. All right. Oh, wait. I did all this on master? All right. No. Oh, I'm in the wrong one. Duh. Um, Now, if we go to GitHub, let's see. Now, of course, this time it's going to push everything. Looking at chat. Sorry for clearing my throat in the mic. That was not fun. There was a show. There's somebody who's doing a show. I think it's MKHD. That's doing a show on YouTube about old tech, and he opens up, because he's in his 20s, and he opens up old tech that he gets, like it's like in the box, and he tries to use it. I think that's a thing. Anyway, I enjoyed that show. I've only watched one of them, but I think it's a series he's doing on old tech, and he goes and finds like mint condition old things. Oh, you know what? I forgot to mention the issue in the PR. Oh well. All right. So what's up with my action here? Why am my actions? Okay, what did I do wrong? None of these are running. I probably should name these better. I don't see any of them. I don't think any of them have run. I wonder what I did. Oh, I wonder if I can't name them the same. Yeah, I might have to change the names of them. That's why. Push face palm. Technically, I should be creating a new PR for this, but I'm totally not going to do that. For the sake of time, I am also going to do this right on top of. I'm going to move this to the master branch and just do it straight there. Bring my changes. Easiest to do that in the GUI. And then, let's see. Oh. Oh my goodness, I screwed that up. Let's see. I'm going to accept incoming. Accept incoming. Save. Oh. All right, switch that back to that. Do that same thing again. Yeah. All right. I'm going to do it here. Again. Because I did my steps wrong. All right, we're past the boring part, hopefully. All right, so why is it the act of updating the workflow means it won't run? Has no runs yet. Maybe the fact that they're there means I have to do something new. I don't know. Let me just test it. I might have the paths wrong. So what if so in order for like on this one, what if I do Zolt, not sure how you say it. You asked how do I do stuff in my terminal? Yes, Eric. Let's do that. Retro tech. We'll call it RetroTech. I'll make that channel. I think I can make it right now. Actually, we need a emoji in there. So old. Oh wait, floppy disk. That's perfect. All right, we're putting it's either that or the fax. I think floppy disk is better, but we got VHS tape. Oh, you can't see them. Sorry, the emoji's on screen. So all right. We should have the same permissions. Yeah. Okay, done. RetroTech down at the bottom after memes. First post. There you go. Also, what was it called? Retro. Yeah, RetroTech. All right, let's see. Is this a playlist? Yeah, this is a playlist. I think this. Yeah, I think this is his playlist. I'm gonna put this playlist in there. That's what it was. I watched his camcorder episode, and he gets out this old working camcorder, and it's just fun and nostalgic. So go check that out. I put that in the Discord. And no, I'm not going to talk about Jenkins in there. All right. What was I going to do? I was going to do a change to see if they'd work. Because maybe the act of putting them in there doesn't mean that they'll run. I don't actually know. Like I said, I don't know a lot. I only know in GitHub Actions what I've done. And all I know is I've done one main YAML file. So what I need to do, though, is I need to change my images. This is a bad habit. I'm lazy on a lot of my stuff. So I need to go on Alpine and get a specific version for that tool. So I'm going to do 3.13.2. So what I should be doing here is 3.13.2. That way, because I'm making this workflow and it will only update my images when something in this directory changes, at least that's how it's supposed to work, assuming my workflow is going to work right, then I need to be on a specific version. That way, the way I'm going to update this in the future is I come in here and I change the Alpine version. At least that's how it's all supposed to work. And then let's see. Nope. Control R. Yeah. I know. Bad habit. Same commit messages. I'm breaking all the rules. Breaking them all. Breaking the law. Breaking the law. All right. And then I did that on date. So I should be able to look here. And why? Why is it not running? Did I miss it in chat? Did someone see my problem? The workflow seems enabled. It must be the path. You know what? You know what? I bet you the path has to have something in it. I bet you the path is wrong. I bet you it has to be like that. I didn't put any wildcards in, so it's probably where's my... Oh, you know what? I totally meant to say this at the beginning of this show. We talked about this yesterday in the DevOps chat. But something that I want to spend some time on here in the near future is crossplane. So I'm going to put this in chat. This is a great video from a friend of mine on a project I want to check out. It's talking about crossplane. So crossplane is basically something that runs on Kubernetes that helps manage your infrastructure in a GitOps-like way. If you've been on this channel at all lately in the last year, we talk about GitOps quite frequently as a way to make sure that you're using Git to store all your infrastructure as code and have something automated. Specific in this case, it's always in Kubernetes because GitOps kind of started with Kubernetes. At least the term was focused around automating things in Kubernetes so that you don't run kube control commands. You only update Git, commit to a repo, and then some engine takes the changes and applies it, right? And so for Kubernetes, that's just kube control apply command or the API equivalent of that. So tools like Argo CD, Flux, these tools are applying that to the Kubernetes manifest. But what if you want other things that aren't Kubernetes manifest? Well, crossplane, the way I could describe it, not near as good as Victor does here in this video. Victor describes and goes through how to use crossplane for other things. So you can set up infrastructure with this crossplane running in Kubernetes, and it won't just apply your changes. That we've done that. That's like auto applying things isn't new. The difference is I want it to constantly check my infrastructure to make sure that it matches, and if it doesn't match, to reapply my requirements in Git that will essentially revert any unnecessary changes that happened outside of Git. So if someone builds some infrastructure in AWS and then later, and they did that with Terraform, and then later someone goes in the GUI and changes it, there's no system that says, oh, I need to reapply Terraform because that's not the way to do it. You got to do it through Terraform. You'd have to run Terraform again, and it would have to recognize that change and then basically undo that change, right? But Terraform doesn't necessarily know how to do that. It's not automatically checking. So crossplane is one of the ways to do that, or at least the first way that Victor has found. So he has a great video on it. I highly recommend his channel. Go do that. I meant to say that at the very beginning when we actually had people watching the show. I'll probably mention it next time. But I wanted people to check that out because I want to get more people's opinions on that, and because I think that's the future of infrastructure. And of course, there's a lot of complexity hidden there because it is quite complicated to assess infrastructure through a set of APIs and then possibly even revert things if they're changed incorrectly outside of your GitOps process. So there's probably a lot of complexity hidden behind the scenes, but that's how I think we want to learn about. Oh, I didn't mean to close that. All right, so where were we? My actions are not firing. That's where we are. And it's probably due to my path thing, so I'm guessing. Did I close it? No. Sub project. Okay, maybe it's 2 stars. Maybe I screwed that up. On the double star format. Come on, baby, hold it together. Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing wrong here. On pushes to branch master. Oh. So I fixed this, but it's only going to run. So here's another thing. Because of the path, it won't run the job. This is how I understand it. It won't run the job if I update the job file, because it's only going to. So now what has to happen is I probably need the workflow to be in a subdirectory for each one of these and then add that to the paths. So that way, if I update the job, it's going to run it. At least that's how I'm going to interpret this to work. So all right. Now let's see if my theory is correct. There we go. That's what it was. All right. So in what I have to do then to make this, because obviously if I change the way I build my app, I don't want to have to change the app itself. So I'm going to have to put these into directories or hard code the path, right? So I could, at least I think that this would work this way. Maybe an anti-pattern. I don't know. So GitHub workflows date.yaml. Yeah. I was born the year that GameStop was founded. That's an interesting statistic about the year you were born. Okay, so on my prompt, people that ask questions around my prompt, so go to bretfisher.com/shell. And that's all the utilities I use in my shell setup. That's there. Sorry if someone else already mentioned that. Is this all on the new ARM Mac today? No, actually, technically the ARM, the M1 Mac is my wife's desktop. So I remote into it to do things, but I still am primarily on an Intel machine. There's still reasons. I don't know. I haven't. She already has a laptop, so I made the M1 her desktop, because there's some, like, even common things like Google Drive, the add-on, the little app doesn't work on M1. Actually, you know what? It may have shipped. I can't remember. If it didn't work when I set it up a month ago. So there's still a lot of rough edges, and I didn't want to force myself to use an M1 all day. So I am not on the M1, John. Thank you for that question. You're using ZSH, but I don't have those labels as you do it in the prompt. So what you're talking about, I think, is where I say master, default, and Docker desktop. So the master one is my repo branch, and default and Docker desktop, those are the context. And if you go look at inside that /shell, you'll actually see a template that sets up the master. or it sets up the Docker context, I think. So let me know if you can't figure it out in Discord, and I will, I don't know, do a different update or something. But I don't have my exact setup right here, but I have the template that I use. It's basically a ZSH template that allows you to do things in the command line. I have it kind of hacky. It's probably not efficient, and it's probably for those of you that want a really fast shell. Don't do my setup because it takes a quarter second. It's not instant, so it's kind of slow there. But at least it gives me the context, so that way when I'm working on Docker servers or I'm working on a different kube control server, I always can just see my command line without having to type like Docker context ls, like kube control config, get context. Like I don't have to type those commands. I can just see them with the shell. But in the background, what it's doing is it's running those commands every time, and so it's very heavy. It's very heavy on the CLI. So I don't recommend it for a fast shell. But for me, I'm okay with that quarter second lag or whatever. Can you create normal users in the containers apart from root? Yes, you can totally do that. Actually, that's how you would recommend doing production apps. The way to do that is to go look up the node image. Go look up, on Docker Hub, look up node, and then click on one of the links. It'll show you the Docker file, and they do it really well. It's refined. So if you go to node, node. And then just click on any of the links for the images. So this will take you to the Docker files if I just click on one of them. So I'm not going to do Alpine, I'll do Buster. If you go to Buster Docker file, look at lines 3 and 4 right there. So I will put that in chat. Actually, let me highlight those. And I'll put that as a link. So that's how you make a user in Docker images on a Debian or any system that has group add. I'm not sure if Alpine uses group add. I'm pretty sure it would. I don't see why they would have a different utility for that purpose, but you would do that. And then later on, notice that in this particular one, it doesn't change the user with a user command. You would then change to using the user with using the node user. In this case, we created a node user, and so later, right before you run your code or run your npm install, you would type user space node. And that tells Docker to shift to using that user in the context of the Docker file so that anything it does is not done as user. So if you were installing apt packages, for example, you would have to have user root. And then later, when you do npm install or node server.js, those commands you would want to run as the node user to keep outside of the root context. So ideally, you're not running your apps as root. Your custom apps I'm talking about. Don't worry about Mongo database or Apache or things like that. This is all about your custom code. Typically, you want your custom code running as a lower privilege user in the container. And that's just, root in a container is not root on the host. So it's not like root is a huge security vulnerability. It just means if someone was to able to exploit your app code and they were able to get a shell inside your container, they would be able to do even less in your container if they're just a regular user. If your running node is root, or Python is root, or whatever, they would have complete access in that container. Doesn't mean they can break out of the container unless it's a really, really old version of Docker, or a really old kernel, or a zero-day exploit. They can't break out of the container that way. But it does mean that they would have even less privileges in the container. So I always recommend doing that with your personal source code. Not all official images do that. For example, the Ruby one does not. It does have www-data, I think, already built in. So you could switch to using www-data, www-data, which is an Apache thing, and also a default Unix. And a lot of default Linux systems have the www-data user already. But I prefer to create my own because that way I'm not inherently expecting some other user. Also, the nice thing here is if you ever are doing bind mounts on Linux, you're going to have to worry about file permissions, or if you ever use volumes, you're going to have to worry about file permissions with your source code and like copying in source code or bind mounting source code. So I often will standardize on using something like a user ID of 1,000 or a group ID of 1,000, because that will ensure that anything you use later, or if you bind mount in code, You just have to make sure that it's matching the user ID and the group ID, one or the other or both, to make sure that the permissions work. So if you ever have to fight with permissions, in your containers, know that the way that the containers and bind mounts have to work is that the host, basically the IDs have to match. Doesn't matter what the name is. Linux does not care about the names. Those are just friendly human names. It's the ID that matches. So you have to make sure that the user ID or the group ID matches for your particular permissions on your files if you're going to bind mount in code. That's a common issue for developers on Linux or in WSL2 on Windows when they're bind mounting their source code in, like with Docker Compose. That's a common issue. So one way to get around it is to hard code these user IDs, make sure your stuff's in the container as this user ID, and then on the host, you can either like for example, you can set the group on your host files to group ID of 1,000 and give all the permissions on the group, and that way you can share code because maybe your user on your WSL2 machine or on your Linux machine maybe your host user isn't 1,000, and so this is kind of an easy way to get around it is to use the group, or just make it world writable. You can do that too. It's anyway. I know that's not what you asked, but that's kind of the world I was going down. You clicked on that link and it moved you out of the live show. Yeah. Sorry, man. Control click, shift click. All right. So now I know why my workflows built and why they didn't build before. Let's go back over here. So date failed. All right, let's go look at why it failed. No such file or directory. Okay. So let's see. The command is docker buildx build tag date latest platform Okay, so I couldn't find the Docker file. So something about the way I did contacts plus path. Date Docker file. Oh, so let's go look at the documentation. I know I had it somewhere. Docker action build push context path context dot. I'm probably using context in the wrong way there. Subdir for Git context is not yet supported, but you can use the path context in the meantime. All right. So let's see. Date. It's not terribly important because, I mean, I could do something like this. I could do date / Docker file. What I, but I think what's supposed to happen is, I think there's a tool to run GitHub Actions locally. Yeah, it's act. And I think I have that. How do I run a specific or action name directly? Act, event name to run. So act is it's actually a third party. I don't think it's made officially by GitHub, which is weird. You would think that GitHub would have a GitHub Actions local runner. But I could try. Oops. I think it just does on push by default. So I'll let that run. Question on BuildX. I think I talk a little bit about BuildKit. So BuildX is just running BuildKit, right? And then a couple of the things it does is it provides automation around the build command. So eventually they're supposed to get rid of BuildX and it actually moves to Docker build automatically. But the first thing is you, these all failed. Yeah. I don't know act, so I'm not even going to try to troubleshoot act. I'm just going to have to keep pushing until I get it right. So save. Let's see. Go back over here. All right. So how do you should start more on the BuildX thing for John? I'd say go look at the documentation first. Just go look at the Docker docs for the BuildX command. So Docker BuildX, working with BuildX. So they've got command line reference and then more of a little bit of an overview walkthrough. And so it'll show you some of the capabilities. It allows you to build multi-platform images all at once on multiple platforms at the same time. It allows you to do a build of your images and then push them automatically to your registry as soon as it's done building them successfully. So it saves you a step. It allows you to create remote builders on other different Docker servers. So you can actually do Docker builds across a series of infrastructure. Like let's say if you didn't want to use QEMU, but you wanted to build on ARM and Intel. So you could have your local machine running Intel. You could then create a new Docker context that points to a Raspberry Pi. And as long as you have a context set up for that, you could use BuildX to ship it to, basically it would build the Intel one locally and then build the ARM one remotely for a particular architecture or platform. And then it would push them all up. So it's quite fancy. It's got a lot more commands. It's got, well, the commands are different. Docker buildx. So like to do a regular build, you would do a Docker buildx build, and it would act pretty normal to what you're usually experiencing with Docker build. So you could just do that out of the box, and then just say, like the Docker file I want to do. So maybe I want to do the one here in the date directory. So file. Come on. Yeah, Docker buildx build, and then we say like date Docker file, and then tag. And then and for context, I want to point it to date. Yeah, so it just built the image. And notice that it's automatically using BuildKit. That's the new builder, so you get a lot of advanced metrics in here about time. And it also can do parallel on multi-stage builds. It can parallel build multi-stages. So yeah, so just for more help on that, do Docker buildx help. And you'll see it's got this bake thing, which is even more advanced. It's actually a more advanced version of building from a file. And you've got prune, which allows you to essentially, instead of deleting images or other things, it allows you to just prune things from the build cache, which you don't necessarily see those automatically in the image list, but there is things taking up space. If you did the Docker system df, you would see the disk space usage of all the different parts. So the build cache for me is taking up 30 megs, so I could do a Docker buildx prune to clean up the build cache, for example. So there's lots of little things that it can do that's more than what the original Docker build command could do. So now I pushed, let's go see. No, it failed. It's probably still that context thing. Yeah, path date not found. So it's me being dumb. So I'm just going to say date there. I'm just going to do that. Really what I want to do is I want to change the working directory. So that might be like before I do this action, I want to be in the directory of that file. So anyway, so that's probably the fix for that. Not sure I like that. I'd rather change the working directory and then have everything the same based on that working directory, but all right. This is the one. I can feel it. I can feel it. I fixed it. Docker Compose, just go check the repo. Docker, github.com, Conrad, go to github.com/docker/compose-CLI. Oh, right, it worked. So it only, let's see. It only post build and push clock. That doesn't tell me anything. Oh, that's post. So there we go. It built the image, pushed it to the registry. Those are all the different layers getting pushed. And then what I should be able to do is go to hub. No, not there. hub.docker.com/r/Bret Fisher/date. Oh, that was weird. GitHub hub.docker.com/r/Bret Fisher/date. There we go. And it should updated 2 minutes ago. Sweet. And it has the Docker file, which is better because it didn't have that before. So I don't know. Somehow that got fixed. Builds. All right. So all these builds are going to go away. See, because I'm no longer building on Docker Hub, and Docker Hub doesn't see GitHub builds. So these are actually, I need to like get rid of those. But when I go to the back here, I can see tags. I only have the latest tag. And you can now see it's now building on AMD and ARM, 3 different versions of ARM. So it now builds across 4 platforms. And yeah, the build activity, it's really, I mean, I don't know how to, like, I need to remove all this history because it's no longer relevant now that I'm building and pushing outside of Docker, but I don't think I can do that. Auto build triggers on a new build with every git push in your source code. Oh, I need to just delete this. Yeah. So yeah, delete. So now my date app. So now if I go to public. Okay, so that's weird because the Docker file isn't updated with the comment there. So I don't believe that this is actually getting updated. Yeah, see, those builds are really old. And I don't like it. I don't like seeing them, but I can't do anything about it. And then it's still linked to the repo. I don't even know how it's linked to the repo anymore. Because if the builds aren't linked, yeah, see, it's not linked here. I don't understand. I don't understand Docker Hub sometimes. It doesn't make sense. I would think that I'd be able to do. All right, so I have image scanning turned on because I'm paying for Docker Hub. I can do image scanning here. And that's about all I get. So some of this stuff is kind of wrong, and I can't do anything about it with Docker Hub. It's just wrong. So I think it updates the Docker file when you connect the repo, but if you connect the repo, that's for builds, and I'm not doing builds here. So it's just weird. Probably can talk to someone at Docker about that, see if I can't submit some bug reports. Anyway, all right, that's all I have for today. I've been going 2.5 hours, so thank you all for hanging around. I think this is one of my longest streams, so hopefully it wasn't full of boredom. I'm glad you all are entertaining yourselves in chat, because that and we created a whole new conversation in Discord. Ooh, Michael talking about the Sinclair. I had a Sinclair, Michael. That's one of my first computers too. I think I had the Sinclair before the Technicolor computer too. So yeah. Oh, okay. Arne, sorry if I mispronounced that. I'll try that next. I'll try removing the file name, the hard-coded file, and just using the context. Yeah, we'll see if that works. Thank you. Yeah, because that's That's how you would do it locally if you have the default file name. So maybe by doing the file name, it's starting from the root of the repo. Got it. All right, I'll try that next. Yeah, you lose automated description and Docker file updates as well. Yeah. TRS 80. Yep. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Emmanuel. Thanks, Conrad. Thanks, Zolt. Yeah. John, thanks for the comments there. Yeah, I'm going to talk to him and see if I can't just get some feedback. Luckily, because of a Docker captain, I'm able to at least talk to him. So I might want to say, hey, look, this workflow of like moving to GitHub Actions is kind of wonky because I still see this old stuff. And what I want to be able to do is just like link the repo, but not have it build, right? Like have it know where the repo's at that's relating to this. And maybe that's all I need to do. Maybe I just need to go in the build section, tell it where connect it to GitHub, but not for building. Yeah. All right, I'll give him a shot. All right, y'all. I will be here next week. We've got a couple. So next week's going to be in March, and I know I have some upcoming shows in March that are going to have some interviews. So please check back. Follow me on Patreon for all those updates. Anytime I have a visitor on the show, I will make sure and put those out on Patreon. So, that's at patreon.com/BretFisher. And you don't have to pay me there. Just click the follow button and then you'll get emails or app notifications if you use the Patreon app when I have planned guests coming on the show. And I've got several of those happening next month, I believe. And then also DockerCon. Like if you haven't heard about DockerCon, we're going to do another live stream show at DockerCon in May. So when DockerCon goes live, obviously it's going to be virtual again this year. And so sign up there at dockercon.com. And I'm going to be doing I'm not sure exactly how long it's going to be, but we're going to be doing last year. If you didn't know, I did like a 7-hour long live stream, had new guests every hour. We live streamed all day at the show. And I had rotating guests all day, including some pretty big headliners that I was excited to have from Docker and Microsoft. So hopefully we're going to do something like that again this year. I don't know if it's going to be an all-day stream, but we're going to do something where I'm streaming as a part of the event again officially. And stay tuned. So sign up at DockerCon for that to find out what's going on with that in May. That's going to be May 27th. And we'll do a live stream. We don't have hardly any of the details worked out yet, but yeah. Check that out. All right, everyone. See you all again next week. Thanks again for joining me on YouTube Live. I'm here every Thursday, 1 o'clock U.S. Eastern, UTC 1800 UTC. All right. Ciao, all. Ciao.